July 9, 1958. Lituya Bay, Alaska. In a few short hours, a 1,700-foot wall of water will erase a mountainside, snap towering spruce trees like matchsticks, and completely rewrite the laws of physics. But before the wave, there was only the profound silence of the wilderness. To understand this tragedy, you have to understand the era. In the summer of 1958, Alaska was not even officially a U.S. state yet. It was a territory, the ultimate untamed frontier. It was a place where nature still held absolute authority over man. Lituya Bay is a stunning T-shaped fjord located on this remote coast. It is surrounded by ice-capped peaks and glaciers that slowly carve their way down to the dark waters below. For centuries, Native Tlingit folklore warned of a mythical entity named Kah Lituya, a spirit residing deep within the subterranean caves of the bay. The legend said that when Kah Lituya was angered, he would grasp the surface of the water like a blanket and shake it, creating monstrous waves to swallow entire villages. Modern science largely dismissed these chilling stories as mere superstition. The bay was popular with commercial fishermen because its narrow entrance provided a perfect sanctuary from the storms of the open Pacific Ocean. But this tranquil sanctuary hid an invisible threat. The entire bay sat directly on top of the Fairweather Fault, a highly active tectonic boundary where the Pacific Plate is constantly grinding against the North American Plate. The heavily forested mountainsides rising out of the water were essentially piles of fractured, unstable rock. Before we step onto the boats anchored in that doomed inlet to witness what happens when the earth breaks apart, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and like this video. It helps us bring more forgotten history to light. The evening of July 9th was unusually warm. The waters of Lituya Bay were as smooth and reflective as a sheet of dark glass. The sun was slowly setting, casting long golden shadows across the ancient ice. Deep inside the sheltered waters of the bay, 3 small commercial fishing boats had dropped their anchors for the night, unaware that they were parked directly in the crosshairs of a geological time bomb. Near the mouth of the bay was the Badger, a sturdy fishing vessel captained by veteran sailor Bill Swanson and his wife, Vivian. Anchored in a small cove near the very back of the bay was the Edrie, carrying Howard Ulrich and his 7-year-old son, Sonny. Howard had chosen this specific spot because the topography provided excellent cover from the wind. And anchored slightly deeper inside the main inlet was the Sunmore. The Sunmore was operated by Orville and Mickey Wagner. They weren't just business partners. They were a devoted husband and wife team who shared the grueling, exhausting labor of commercial fishing, building a life together on the cold, unforgiving waters of the north. They had finished their work for the day and were looking forward to a quiet rest. The silence of the remote Alaskan wilderness was broken only by the occasional distant crack of glacial ice falling into the water. The fishermen ate their dinners, checked their heavy anchor chains and settled into their bunks. They had no idea that deep beneath the Earth's crust, an unfathomable amount of tectonic pressure, building up like a coiled steel spring for decades, was about to snap. At exactly 10:15 p.m., the silence shattered. A magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck the Fairweather Fault line. This wasn't just a brief tremor, it was an unrelenting physical assault that lasted for nearly 3 agonizing minutes. Aboard the Edrie, Howard Ulrich was thrown from his bunk. He rushed up to the deck, his heart pounding, and looked out at the landscape in paralyzed disbelief. The mountains that framed the bay were literally dancing. The earth was heaving and rolling, tearing ancient spruce trees out of the ground by their roots. The sound was deafening, a sustained, thunderous roar coming from the bedrock itself. The water around the boats began to boil and churn like a chaotic washing machine, driven by enormous pockets of gas escaping from the ruptured fault line beneath the ocean floor. Explosive cracks echoed across the water as the glaciers began to shatter. The sky quickly turned hazy with the thick dust of countless smaller avalanches. But the true apocalypse was unfolding at the very back of the bay, hidden behind the dust, in the steep gorge known as the Gilbert Inlet. High above the water, at an elevation of over 3,000 feet, the relentless shaking had completely destabilized an entire mountainside. In a single instant, an estimated 40 million cubic yards of solid rock, weighing nearly 90 million tons, detached from the face of the cliff. It was an avalanche of stone falling in a sheer vertical drop, hurtling straight down toward the deep, narrow waters below. When 90 million tons of solid rock impacts deep water at over 100 miles per hour, the resulting physics defy human comprehension. It was the exact equivalent of dropping an asteroid directly into a bathtub. The force of the impact displaced almost all of the water in the narrow inlet instantly. Because the fjord was shaped like a deep trench, the water had nowhere to spread out. It had no choice but to go straight up. A solid wall of displaced water erupted from the surface and shot up the opposite side of the mountain. It reached a staggering height of 1,720 feet. To put that number into perspective, that surge of water reached significantly higher than the antenna of the Empire State Building. The sheer force of the water did something incredibly eerie to the landscape. It didn't just knock the ancient spruce trees over. The phenomenal pressure and the churning rock debris completely stripped the bark right off every single piece of timber. Millions of trees were instantly turned into bare, smooth, white logs, looking like a graveyard of bleached bones violently ripped from the earth. The soil itself, which had clung to those mountainsides for thousands of years, was washed away so thoroughly that the remaining bedrock was polished to a bright shine. After reaching its peak, gravity took hold. The mass of water slammed back down, forming a churning wave over 100 feet high. Because of the bay's narrow shape, the wave couldn't dissipate. It was channeled like a freight train, racing directly down the length of Lituya Bay. Aboard the Edry, Howard Ulrich heard the roar approaching. He looked toward the head of the bay and saw a wall of water and pulverized trees hurtling toward them. Knowing they were trapped, he threw a life jacket onto his terrified 7-year-old son, grabbed the radio to scream a panicked mayday call, and braced for the end. The wave slammed into the Edry, snapping the heavy steel anchor chain. The boat was lifted dozens of feet into the air, riding the boiling crest of the wave straight over the tops of the 80-foot-tall pine trees lining the shore, before miraculously dropping them back into the center of the bay. Further down the bay, near the entrance, the nightmare was unfolding differently for Bill and Vivian Swanson on the Badger. As the wave approached the shallow mouth of the inlet, it crested even higher. The wall of water hit their 80-foot vessel and picked it completely out of the sea. Bill Swanson later recounted a detail that defies belief. Looking down over the railing of his ship, he didn't see water. He saw the jagged tops of 80-foot-tall spruce trees passing directly beneath his hull. The wave carried the Badger entirely over the La Chaussee Spit, a strip of land protecting the bay, surfing backwards through the air. Then the water dropped them. The boat crashed stern-first into the open, turbulent Pacific Ocean. The wooden hull didn't just break, it splintered and disintegrated around them. In the pitch-black darkness, surrounded by freezing ocean water and thousands of pieces of jagged debris, the bleeding and heavily injured couple had seconds to react. Fighting through broken ribs and shock, they managed to scramble out of the sinking wreckage. In the darkness, they found their tiny 8-foot wooden skiff. They pulled themselves into the fragile boat, entirely exposed to the biting Alaskan wind and the unpredictable swells of the Pacific, leaving their livelihood at the bottom of the sea. For the survivors still trapped inside the bay, the ordeal was far from over. The receding water had dragged millions of those shattered, bleached white trees back into the inlet, turning the surface into a densely packed 2-foot-thick carpet of jagged wood. Howard Ulrich couldn't even start his engine without completely destroying his propeller. He and his son sat in absolute pitch-black darkness, shivering in the freezing wind. The only sound was the haunting, echoing groan of millions of wooden logs grinding against each other. But as Howard looked through the darkness, he realized the cruelest truth of the night. The Sunmore was gone. When the earthquake had struck, Orville and Mickey Wagner hadn't just waited. They had desperately tried to outrun the apocalypse. Howard had seen them pull their anchor and steam toward the entrance of the bay. They were awake, fighting for their lives, pushing their engine to the limit to escape the incoming wall of water. But human engineering cannot outrun a mountain falling into the sea. The churning wave caught them from behind. The mountain of water completely engulfed the vessel, crushing the cabin and dragging the boat into the icy depths. Orville and Mickey Wagner, the husband and wife who had built their lives on the water, vanished. Not a single plank of the Sunmore or any trace of the Wagners was ever found. When the sun finally rose the next morning, the scale of the devastation was revealed. Lituya Bay was unrecognizable. The shoreline had been scrubbed clean to the bare rock for miles, leaving a bright, distinct trimline. Miraculously, Howard Ulrich, his young son, and the Swansons in their tiny skiff were rescued by other fishing boats. When geologists flew over the bay to survey the damage, they simply refused to accept that water could climb 1,720 feet. But the indisputable physical evidence carved into the mountainside proved that the native Tlingit legends of Kah Lituya were accurate historical records. The story of Lituya Bay isn't just a geological anomaly. It's a testament to the raw, untamed power of the North American continent, and a humbling reminder of how fragile human life is when nature decides to rewrite the map. Now I turn the question to you. If you were in Howard Ulrich's position, sitting in a boat in the pitch black, surrounded by a grinding carpet of dead trees, How do you think you would cope with the terrifying silence that followed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching America Retold. We bring the forgotten and unbelievable chapters of the past back to life, and we will see you in the next one.